Welcome to Timeless Witnesses, where the past is unafraid. Imagine waking up in a windowless stone room, reeking of pain and grease. The cold seeps into your skin. A soft laugh echoes from above, not joyful, but sarcastic and cruel. You shiver as your body recalls the torment of the night before. Bruises as deep as wounds carved into your flesh. The iron shackle around your ankle has rubbed the skin raw, and dried blood flakes off when you move. Footsteps approach, heavy sandals on marble. You know that sound. It's the overseer coming to prepare you for another day of what they call service. Your hands shake as you reach for the thin tunic crumpled in the corner. 15 years old. Though you've stopped counting birthdays since they brought you here. Time moves differently when you're property. The door scrapes open, metal against stone, and harsh sunlight streams in. You squint, raising a trembling hand to shield your eyes. The overseer's silhouette fills the doorway, a mountain of muscle and scars. His face a map of cruelty carved by years of breaking young spirits. Clean yourself, he growls, tossing a damp cloth at your feet. The master has guests arriving tonight. Important guests. And you. His eyes rake over your body with the cold calculation of a horse trader. You're going to help entertain them. Your throat constricts. You know what that means. You've known since the first night they dragged you, kicking and screaming, from your village. Since they told you that your family's debts had been paid in the only currency they had left. You. This was the reality for countless young men in ancient Greece. Not the sanitized version taught in schools, where philosophy and democracy shine bright enough to blind us to the shadows. Behind the marble columns and intellectual discourse, behind the symposiums and political debates, existed a system that consumed the vulnerable and discarded their humanity like broken pottery. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this, and please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The selection process began long before you understood what was happening. Perhaps your family owed money to a wealthy landowner. Perhaps raiders swept through your village during one of the endless wars that plagued the Greek world. Perhaps you were simply born beautiful, in a world that saw beauty as a commodity to be harvested and sold. In the rural villages scattered across the Greek countryside, families lived on the knife's edge of survival. A bad harvest, an injury to the father, a death in the family. Any of these could push a household into debt. And when the creditors came calling, they weren't interested in empty promises or future earnings. They wanted payment in flesh. Picture a small farming community nestled in a valley between olive groves. The houses are simple, mud brick and thatch, with dirt floors and single rooms where entire families sleep together for warmth. Children run naked between the houses, their laughter mixing with the bleating of goats and the distant sound of women grinding grain. It's a harsh life, but it's life nonetheless. Then comes the drought. Week after week of merciless sun beating down on withered crops. The olive trees, ancient and gnarled, produce only shriveled fruit. The barley fields turn brown and brittle. Wells that have sustained the village for generations begin to run dry. Families begin to make choices no parent should ever make. First, they sell their livestock, the goats and sheep that represent their only wealth. Then comes the jewelry, the few precious items passed down through generations. When those are gone, they start looking at their children with different eyes. The slave merchants arrive like vultures sensing carrion. They set up in the village center, their chains and ropes coiled like metal serpents, their ledgers filled with names and prices. They offer immediate payment for long-term contracts. 20 years of service for enough silver to keep a family fed through winter. It sounds reasonable, even generous, when your children are literally starving. But you're 12 years old. You don't understand the mathematics of desperation. You only know that your father won't meet your eyes as he negotiates your price. that your mother turns away when the merchant examines your teeth like you're a horse. You feel the rough hands checking your muscles, evaluating your potential. You hear words like promising and good breeding and suitable for household service, but you don't understand what they mean. Not yet. The merchant counts out silver coins into your father's palm. The metal catches the sunlight, each piece representing a year of your life. Your father's hands shake as he takes the money, but he takes it nonetheless. Your mother covers her face and weeps, but she doesn't stop the transaction. They tell you it's temporary, that you'll earn money and return home a man, wealthy enough to buy your own land, maybe even take a wife. They promise you'll be treated well, that you'll learn valuable skills, that this is an opportunity for advancement. The lies fall from their lips like honey from a broken cone, sweet, but poisonous. The journey to the city is a nightmare of chained necks and blistered feet. You're part of a human caravan now. Dozens of boys and young men linked together by iron and despair. The older ones don't talk much. They've learned that hope is just another word for future disappointment. The younger ones cry for their mothers until their voices give out, or until the overseers beat the sound from their throats. You march through landscapes that would be beautiful under different circumstances. Rolling hills covered in olive groves, coastal roads where the sea sparkles like scattered diamonds, mountain passes where eagles soar overhead. But you see none of it. Your world has shrunk to the length of chain between you and the boy in front of you, to the rhythm of feet on stone, to the growing certainty that you will never see home again. At night, they chain you to stakes driven into the ground. You lie on your side in the dirt, listening to the muffled sobs of the other boys, feeling the weight of the iron around your neck like a collar of fate. Sometimes the merchants bring visitors to inspect their merchandise. Men with soft hands and calculating eyes who walk among you like farmers examining cattle. They prod and poke, checking for disease or injury, evaluating your potential for various forms of service. You learn to recognize the different types of buyers. The agricultural slave owners look for muscle and endurance. They want boys who can work in the fields from dawn to dusk. The household masters seek a different quality: compliance, intelligence, a certain fragility that suggests you won't cause trouble. But there's a third category, and you learn to dread their visits most of all. These men dress in fine clothing and speak with cultured accents. They smell of expensive perfumes and wine, and their fingers glitter with rings. When they examine you, their touch lingers in ways that make your skin crawl. They're looking for something specific, a combination of youth and beauty that has nothing to do with labor and everything to do with pleasure. The slave market in Athens is assault on every sense. The sound hits you first. Hundreds of voices haggling, crying, pleading, commanding. The smell comes next. Unwashed bodies, fierce sweat, urine, and something else you can't identify, but that makes your stomach turn. Then you see it, and you understand why the older slaves warned you to keep your eyes down. Naked bodies arranged in rows like merchandise. Children barely old enough to walk, standing beside their mothers, their eyes wide with confusion. Old men with broken spirits and bent backs, their value measured in whatever strength remains in their aging muscles. And everywhere the buyers, circling like sharks, pointing and discussing prices as if the people on the platforms can't hear every word. You're cleaned and oiled before your sale, not out of kindness, but because clean merchandise fetches higher prices. The oil makes your skin gleam in the sunlight, highlighting the lean muscles you've developed during the journey. Someone has decided you're too pretty for field work, and you're positioned with the household slaves, the ones destined for indoor service. The auctioneer's voice booms across the market as he describes your attributes, your age, your region of origin, your physical condition. He mentions your pleasing appearance and gentle temperament, code words that make certain buyers lean forward with interest. The bidding starts low, but climbs quickly as more men join the competition. You stand frozen on the platform, trying to disappear into yourself as strange hands examine your body. Someone forces your mouth open to check your teeth. Another tests the strength of your grip. A third runs his fingers through your hair, commenting on its texture and color. You're not a person anymore. You're an object being evaluated for purchase. The winning bidder is a man named Lysander, though you won't learn his name until later. All you see now is his satisfied smile as he counts out the silver, his eyes already possessing you before the transaction is complete. He's middle-aged and well-fed, with the soft hands of someone who's never done manual labor. His tunic is expensive silk, dyed the deep purple that proclaims wealth and status. When he looks at you, there's something in his expression that makes you want to run, even though the chains make escape impossible. Lysander owns a large household in the wealthy district of Athens. His house is bigger than your entire village. Marble columns, painted walls, elaborate mosaics depicting gods and heroes. Servants scurry through corridors carrying trays of food and wine, their movements quick and nervous. You notice that many of them are young men, all of them beautiful in different ways. All of them bearing the same look of resigned despair you're beginning to recognize as the face of captivity. The overseer who claims you from Lysander is named Demetrius. He's a former slave himself, purchased young, and worked his way up through a combination of intelligence and ruthlessness. Now he manages the household slaves with an iron fist, understanding better than anyone how to break spirits and ensure compliance. He explains the rules as he leads you through the house. You will be fed twice daily, barley porridge in the morning, bread and olives in the evening. You will be given clean clothes once per week. You will bathe when ordered, eat when ordered, sleep when ordered. You will speak only when spoken to. You will never look a free person directly in the eyes. You will never refuse an order, no matter what that order might be. And then comes the part that makes your blood freeze in your veins. You are here to serve the master and his guests in whatever capacity they require. This service may involve pouring wine, serving food, cleaning rooms, or providing entertainment. The nature of this entertainment, Demetrius explains with a cruel smile, will become clear in time. Some slaves resist at first. He continues. But resistance only leads to pain. Compliance, on the other hand, can lead to certain privileges, better food, a warmer place to sleep, perhaps even small personal possessions. Your new quarters are in the basement of the house, a series of small cells where the male slaves sleep. Each cell contains a straw mattress, a thin blanket, and a chamber pot. The walls are thick stone designed to muffle sound. You quickly learn why this is necessary. The other slaves welcome you with a mixture of sympathy and warning. There's Marcus, a boy about your age who's been here for 2 years. His eyes hold depths of pain that seem impossible for someone so young. There's Alexios, older and scarred, who tells you in whispered conversations about the special guests who visit the house and what they expect from the entertainment. And there's Philemon, barely 14, but with the haunted expression of someone much older. He was once the son of a small merchant family until his father's business failed and creditors seized everything, including the children. He's been in the house for 6 months, and he's the one who explains what really happens during the symposiums. Greek culture celebrated the symposium, the drinking party where educated men gathered to discuss philosophy, politics, and art. These were sophisticated affairs, intellectually stimulating conversations between the greatest minds of the ancient world. At least, that's how they're remembered. The reality was often very different, especially when the wine flowed freely and the guests demanded more intimate entertainment. The slaves were expected to serve not just food and drink, but themselves. The philosophers who debated the nature of virtue and justice by day had no qualms about using young slaves for their pleasure by night. The same men who wrote beautiful poetry about love and honor treated their human property like living toys, to be used and discarded at will. Philemon describes the preparation rituals with a voice devoid of emotion, as if he's talking about someone else's life. The slaves are bathed and oiled, their bodies made smooth and gleaming. They're given special tunics, thin fabric that clings to their forms, designed more to entice than to clothe. Sometimes they're given jewelry, golden bracelets or necklaces that mark them as ornamental rather than utilitarian. The symposium begins formally enough. The guests recline on couches arranged around the room, discussing the topics of the day while slaves pour wine and present elaborate dishes. The conversation might touch on the nature of democracy, the philosophy of Socrates, or the latest military campaigns. These are educated, cultured men who pride themselves on their intellectual sophistication. But as the evening progresses and the wine takes effect, the tone shifts. The philosophical discussions give way to cruder entertainment. Stories become bawdy jokes. Intellectual debates devolve into boastful competition. And the slaves who have been serving silently around the edges of the room suddenly find themselves the center of attention. It starts with small requests. Pour wine for this guest. Massage the shoulders of that one. Feed grapes to the man on the corner couch. Each task seems innocent enough, but you learn to read the signs. The way conversations quiet when you approach. The lingering touches that have nothing to do with serving wine. The way certain guests watch your movements with predatory interest. The first time you're selected for special service, you're too naive to understand what's happening. A guest, a man old enough to be your grandfather, requests that you join him on his couch. He wants you to share his wine, he says, to discuss your homeland, to tell him about your family. His questions seem friendly at first. Where are you from? Do you miss your home? Are you being treated well? His hand rests on your shoulder as he talks, then slowly moves to your back, then lower. You try to move away, but his grip tightens. Other guests are watching now, their conversations fading as they focus on the entertainment. What happens next is burned into your memory with the clarity that only trauma can provide. The way your protests are ignored, how your struggles are met with laughter from the other guests, the feeling of helplessness as hands hold you down, as clothing is torn away, as your childhood ends in the most brutal way possible. Afterwards, you lie in your cell and stare at the stone ceiling, trying to understand how the world could contain such cruelty. Your body aches, but the emotional wounds cut deeper. You're not even a person anymore. You're a thing to be used and discarded, a source of entertainment for men who write poetry about the beauty of the human soul. But this is only the beginning. Over the following months, you learn that what happened that first night was considered mild by the standards of the house. Some guests have specific preferences, particular cruelties they enjoy inflicting. Others compete to see who can break a slave's spirit most completely. The overseer encourages this behavior, knowing that broken slaves are compliant slaves. You discover that the household operates on a complex hierarchy of abuse. The newest slaves bear the worst treatment, serving as fresh meat for the guests' appetites. Those who survive long enough might be promoted to different roles. Personal servants to less violent masters, or kitchen workers who rarely interact with guests directly. But promotion requires more than just survival. It requires a complete surrender of dignity, a willingness to participate in your own dehumanization. Some slaves try to resist. Marcus attempted to escape during his first month, only to be recaptured and beaten so severely that he walked with a limp for weeks afterward. Alexios once refused a particularly degrading order and spent 3 days chained in the courtyard without food or water, exposed to the elements as an example to the others. But resistance, you learn, takes many forms. Some slaves retreat so deeply into themselves that they become like walking corpses, present in body but absent in spirit. Others develop a kind of desperate cunning, learning to anticipate their master's moods and avoid the punishments through careful observation and submission. And a few, the lucky ones, simply die. Whether from disease, injury, or sheer despair, death becomes a form of liberation. You've seen slaves simply stop eating, stop responding to orders, stop caring whether they live or die. The overseers usually replace them quickly. There's always a fresh supply of young bodies available at the slave markets. The psychological techniques used to break slaves are as sophisticated as they are cruel. Isolation is one of the most effective weapons. You're cut off from everyone you've ever known, surrounded by people who are as powerless as you are. The other slaves can offer sympathy, but they can't provide protection or hope. Unpredictability is another tool. You never know when you'll be summoned, what will be required of you, or how severe the punishment might be for the smallest mistake. This constant uncertainty creates a state of chronic fear that wears down resistance more effectively than any physical torture. But perhaps the most insidious technique is the destruction of identity. They take away your name and give you another, something that sounds more exotic or pleasing to Greek ears. They forbid you from speaking your native language or practicing your family's customs. They dress you in their clothes, feed you their food, force you to worship their gods. Slowly, systematically. They erase everything that made you who you were. The guests who visit the house represent the cream of Athenian society: wealthy merchants, government officials, renowned philosophers, celebrated artists, men whose names are recorded in history as great contributors to human civilization. Yet here, in the privacy of Lysander's dining room, they shed their public personas and reveal appetites that would shock their admirers. There's Dionysios, a respected politician known for his speeches about justice and civic virtue in public. He champions the rights of citizens and speaks eloquently about the moral foundations of society. In private, he delights in humiliating young slaves, forcing them to perform degrading acts while he quotes passages from Homer. Then there's Cleomenes, a wealthy merchant who funds public works and is praised for his generosity to the poor. His charitable reputation masks a taste for violence that leaves slaves scarred and broken. He views his cruelty as a form of education, claiming that pain teaches valuable lessons about the natural order of society. Most disturbing of all is Sophistes, a philosopher who writes treatises on ethics and the nature of the good life. His public teachings emphasize the importance of virtue, self-control, and respect for the divine order. But when wine loosens his tongue and darkens his heart, he becomes a monster who justifies every cruelty with elaborate philosophical arguments. These men don't see their behavior as contradictory. In their minds, slaves exist in a different moral category than free citizens. The virtues that apply to relationships between equals simply don't extend to property. A man can be generous to his neighbors, just to his peers, and cruel to his slaves without any sense of inconsistency. This moral blindness extends throughout Greek society, the same culture that produced magnificent art, groundbreaking philosophy, and innovative political systems also normalized the complete dehumanization of entire classes of people. The contradiction isn't accidental, it's structural. The leisure time that allowed free citizens to pursue intellectual and artistic endeavors was built on the backs of slave labor. As months turn into years, you develop survival strategies that would have been unimaginable to your younger self. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate a guest's mood and preferences. You discover which behaviors are most likely to earn rewards, and which will result in punishment. You master the art of psychological absence, appearing compliant while retreating so deeply into yourself that your spirit remains untouchable. But survival comes at a cost. Each compromise with evil chips away at something essential inside you. Each moment of submission reinforces the lesson that you are powerless, worthless, disposable. The boy who once ran laughing through olive groves becomes a hollow-eyed young man who moves through life like a ghost, haunting his own body. The other slaves become your only family, bound together by shared trauma and mutual protection. You develop a silent language of glances and gestures, ways to communicate warnings and offer comfort without alerting the overseers. You share what little food you can spare, take turns standing watch during the few hours of rest you're allowed, and hold each other when the nightmares become too much to bear alone. But even these relationships are tainted by the system that created them. Competition for the master's favor can turn friends into enemies. The promise of better treatment might tempt someone to betray a planned escape or report another slave's minor transgression. The very bonds that keep you sane also become tools for your oppression. Some nights, lying on your straw mattress in the darkness. You try to remember your mother's face, but the image grows fainter with each passing month, replaced by the faces of your tormentors. You try to recall the sound of your father's voice, but it's drowned out by the laughter of guests and the cries of other slaves. Your past becomes as distant as a half-remembered dream, while your present nightmare stretches endlessly toward an unimaginable future. The physical abuse is constant and varied. Some guests prefer their entertainment to be subtle, psychological domination that leaves no visible marks but carves deep wounds in the spirit. Others are more direct, using fists and whips and heated metal to inscribe their ownership on slave bodies. Still others take pleasure in elaborate tortures that combine physical pain with sexual humiliation in ways that defy description. But it's the casual nature of the cruelty that proves most devastating. A guest might pause in the middle of a philosophical discussion to strike a slave for no reason other than boredom. Another might interrupt his recitation of poetry to demand increasingly degrading acts from the evening's entertainment. The violence isn't passionate or personal. It's as routine as pouring wine or lighting lamps. The slaves learn to treat their own bodies as foreign objects, things that happen to house their consciousness, but don't really belong to them. You develop the ability to float above yourself during the worst moments, to observe your own suffering with a kind of detached curiosity. It's a survival mechanism, but it comes with its own price. A growing disconnection from your own humanity that mirrors the way your masters see you. As your second year in the house begins, you notice changes in yourself that go beyond the obvious physical scars. Your voice sounds different, flatter, more careful, stripped of the regional accent that once marked you as a child of the mountains. Your posture has changed too. You move with the hunched shoulders and downcast eyes of someone who has learned that visibility leads to suffering. More disturbing are the changes in your thinking. You catch yourself automatically calculating the preferences and moods of free people, even when they have no power over you. You flinch at unexpected sounds and movements. You find yourself grateful for small mercies, an extra piece of bread, a night without summoning, a master who is merely indifferent rather than actively cruel. This psychological conditioning is perhaps the system's greatest success. It creates slaves who don't just obey out of fear, but who internalize their powerlessness so completely that resistance becomes literally unthinkable. The masters don't need to constantly watch and threaten because their victims have learned to police themselves. Yet even in this environment of systematic dehumanization, small acts of resistance persist. Slaves develop subtle ways to maintain their dignity and humanity. They share stories of their homelands, keeping alive memories that their masters try to erase. They create art from scraps, tiny sculptures hidden in walls, songs hummed too quietly for overseers to hear, poems composed in languages their captors don't understand. Most importantly, they bear witness. In whispered conversations during brief moments of privacy, they share their experiences and validate each other's suffering. They remember the names of those who have died, ensuring that these forgotten victims are not completely erased from history. They document cruelties and preserve evidence of crimes that their society refuses to acknowledge. This bearing witness becomes a form of resistance in itself. By insisting on their own humanity and the reality of their suffering, the slaves resist the master narrative that portrays them as contented property or willing participants in their own exploitation. They maintain the possibility that someday someone will listen to their stories and recognize their truth. But such resistance requires enormous courage and comes with deadly risks. Slaves caught communicating in their native languages might have their tongues cut out. Those found sharing food or offering comfort to fellow slaves could be separated or sold to crueler masters. The very acts that preserve humanity also invite punishment designed to destroy it. The house itself becomes a character in this story, its marble halls echoing with the ghosts of countless victims, its decorated walls concealing chambers where unspeakable acts occur nightly. The beautiful mosaics and painted frescoes provide a grotesque contrast to the human misery they shelter. Art and horror coexist in the same space, reflecting the broader contradictions of a civilization built on others' suffering. In the third year, something breaks inside you that you didn't even know could break. It happens during a particularly elaborate symposium, one celebrating a military victory against a neighboring city-state. The guests are more numerous than usual, their celebration more intense, their demands more creative in their cruelty. You're brought before a group of young aristocrats, barely older than yourself, but already drunk on wine and inherited power. They've devised what they consider an amusing game, a contest to see who can elicit the most entertaining reactions from their human toys. They take turns issuing commands, each more humiliating than the last, while keeping score like children playing knucklebones. As you perform their degrading spectacle, something fundamental shifts in your perception. You stop seeing yourself as a person forced to endure terrible things and begin seeing yourself as exactly what they see, a thing that exists for their amusement. The last thread connecting you to the boy who once herded goats in mountain pastures finally snaps. This psychological death is almost a relief, without hope or dignity to protect. There's no more pain in surrender. You become the perfect slave, anticipating needs before they're voiced, accepting any treatment without resistance, existing in a state of complete compliance that requires no thought or feeling. The overseers notice the change and reward it. You're given better clothes, more regular meals, and a cell with an actual window. Other slaves look at you with a mixture of envy and horror, recognizing what you've become and understanding the price you've paid for these minor comforts. But even in this state of psychological numbness, fragments of awareness persist. You observe the household's rhythms with the detached interest of someone watching a play. You notice patterns in the guests' behavior, cycles of violence and indulgence that follow predictable patterns. You begin to understand the economics of suffering that keep the system functioning. The house operates on a constant supply of fresh victims. Young slaves rarely last more than a few years before they're either broken beyond usefulness or aged beyond their master's preferences. Some die from disease or injury. Others are sold to gladiator schools or mining operations. When their beauty fades, a few simply disappear one night, their fate unrecorded and unlamented. This turnover necessitates regular visits to the slave markets. You sometimes accompany Demetrius on these trips, serving as an example of what proper training can accomplish. The irony isn't lost on you. The broken boy who once stood trembling on the auction block now helps evaluate new merchandise for his master's collection. You watch the terror in young faces and feel nothing. When Demetrius asks your opinion on a particular boy's suitability, you offer technical assessments based on years of bitter experience. This one will resist too much and require breaking. That one is already too damaged to be worth the investment. The third shows promise for long-term service. The new slaves look at you with desperate hope, seeing in your survival some possibility of endurance. They don't understand that survival and living are very different things. They can't see that the person standing before them died years ago, leaving only a hollow shell programmed to serve. During one market visit, you encounter a boy who reminds you powerfully of your younger self. Same dark hair, same frightened eyes, same desperate search for kindness in a world suddenly turned hostile. He's maybe 13, small for his age, but with the lean strength of someone raised on hard work and simple food. Something stirs in the deadness behind your ribs as you watch him. For just a moment, you remember what it felt like to be human. The sensation is so unexpected and painful that you actually stagger, causing Demetrius to grab your arm and ask if you're ill. You lie and say the heat is affecting you, but the truth is more complicated. Seeing that boy has awakened something you thought permanently extinguished. Not hope exactly, but a recognition that the person you once were deserves to be mourned. That the life stolen from you had value, even if no one else acknowledged it. The boy is purchased by a different household, sparing you the torture of watching his transformation. But his image haunts you for weeks afterward, bringing dreams you haven't experienced in years. You find yourself remembering your mother's cooking, your father's laugh, the feeling of wind on your face as you ran through mountain meadows. These memories are dangerous. They threaten the careful numbness that keeps you functional. But they also remind you that somewhere beneath the perfect slave, fragments of your original self still exist. The question becomes whether those fragments are worth preserving or whether complete surrender would be a mercy. The answer comes during another symposium, this one quieter than usual. The guests are older men, philosophers and politicians engaged in serious discussion about the nature of justice and the ideal state. You serve wine and listen to their debates with the trained invisibility of household property. They're discussing the writings of a famous philosopher, debating whether virtue can be taught or whether it's innate. One guest argues that some people are naturally suited for slavery, born with inferior souls, that them incapable of self-governance. Another contends that environment shapes character, that even slaves might be capable of virtue under different circumstances. The irony is overwhelming. These men who rape children and torture the helpless are debating the nature of virtue while you, their victim, stand silently holding their wine. They speak of justice while perpetrating the greatest injustices. They theorize about the ideal state while creating hell on earth for those under their power. But listening to their debate, you realize something important. Their philosophical sophistication doesn't excuse their cruelty. It makes it worse. They have the intellectual capacity to understand the wrongness of their actions, yet they choose evil anyway. They're not ignorant barbarians acting from instinct. They're educated monsters who have rationalized their monstrosities. This realization brings a strange kind of clarity. You understand now that the system isn't the result of ignorance or primitive thinking. It's the product of deliberate choices made by people who know better but choose worse. The beautiful art, the philosophical discussions, the political innovations, none of these represent moral progress. They're just different forms of human expression that coexist comfortably with unlimited cruelty. Years pass in this state of clear-eyed despair. You perfect the art of invisible service, moving through the household like a ghost that occasionally assumes solid form when needed. You watch younger slaves arrive and break, observe the cycles of violence and exploitation that never change. Witness the endless parade of respected citizens who shed their public masks in private. Some nights, you stand at your small window and look up at the same stars you once watched from your family's roof. You wonder if your parents are still alive, whether they ever think of the son they sold to survive. You imagine your siblings grown up, perhaps with children of their own, telling stories about the brother who went away when they were young. But these thoughts no longer bring pain. They're more like distant music, beautiful but unrelated to your current existence. You've learned to appreciate them without longing for what they represent. It's a form of meditation, this ability to hold memories without attachment. The end, when it comes, arrives without warning or drama. You're perhaps 25 now, though exact age has lost meaning in this place where time is measured in suffering rather than seasons. Your body shows the accumulated damage of years of abuse, scars that never properly healed, joints that ache from old injuries, a persistent cough that suggests something wrong in your chest. More significantly, your usefulness is declining. The guests who once fought to claim your services now barely notice your presence. New slaves have arrived with fresh beauty and unbroken spirits, making your practiced compliance seem ordinary rather than exotic. You're becoming what every slave eventually becomes, invisible in a different way, overlooked rather than coveted. Demetrius calls you to his quarters one morning and explains that you're being sold to a mining operation in the mountains. It's presented as neither punishment nor reward, simply an economic decision. Your value as household entertainment has depreciated below the cost of maintenance, but you still have years of hard labor ahead of you. The mining camps are where slaves go to die slowly. Everyone knows this, including you. The work is backbreaking, the conditions lethal, the life expectancy measured in months rather than years. It's not execution exactly, but it's not survival either. You receive this news with the same emotional flatness that has characterized your existence for years. Death in the mines, or death in the household. What difference does it make? You've been dead in every meaningful sense for so long that the cessation of biological functions seems almost redundant. But as you prepare for transport, something unexpected happens. Marcus, the boy who arrived around the same time as you, approaches during your last night in the familiar cell. He somehow managed to survive and even thrive in his own way, earning a position as personal servant to Lysander's wife. The work is easier, the abuse less frequent, the food more regular. He presses something into your hand, a small piece of metal, sharpened to a point. It's crude but effective, a tool that could open either locks or veins. He doesn't say anything, but his meaning is clear. You have choices about how your story ends. That night, you hold the metal shard and contemplate your options. You could try to escape, though the chances of success are virtually zero, and the punishments for failure would be excruciating. You could use it as a weapon against your captors, achieving a moment of revenge before inevitable death. Or you could turn it on yourself, choosing the timing and manner of your exit from this world. Each option has its appeal. Escape offers the fantasy of freedom, even if the reality would likely be brief recapture and tortured death. Violence would provide satisfaction, allowing you to inflict some fraction of the pain you've endured. Suicide would grant control, letting you choose dignity over degradation in your final moments. But as dawn approaches, you make a different choice. You hide the weapon where other slaves might find it, passing along the gift of options that Marcus gave you. Your story may be ending, but others are still being written. Perhaps one of them will find a different conclusion. The journey to the mines takes you through landscapes that spark forgotten memories, mountain paths that remind you of childhood adventures, streams where you once caught fish with your bare hands, villages that could be your own, filled with families who might include your surviving relatives. You don't try to escape. The chains would make flight impossible, and the guards are experienced in preventing such attempts. Instead, you use the journey to say goodbye to the world you're leaving. You watch eagles soar overhead, and remember when you dreamed of flying. You smell wildflowers and recall your mother's garden. You listen to wind through pine trees and hear echoes of your father's voice. The mining camp is everything you expected, and worse. Hundreds of slaves working in conditions that make household service seem luxurious. The tunnels are narrow and unstable, prone to collapse without warning. The air is thick with dust that tears at lungs and clouds vision. The quotas are impossible, designed to extract maximum labor before inevitable death. But even here, in this final circle of hell, you discover something remarkable. The slaves have created their own society, their own forms of resistance and mutual aid. They share food when possible, take turns supporting those too weak to work, and maintain elaborate networks of communication that span the entire operation. Most importantly, they remember. In whispered conversations during brief rest periods, they tell stories of their lives before captivity. They speak names of loved ones, describe customs and traditions from dozens of different cultures, and preserve languages their captors have tried to eliminate. They bear witness to each other's humanity in ways that their masters never could. Your own story becomes part of this oral history. The boy from the mountain village who survived years in an Athenian household. The child who was sold to pay his family's debts and endured unimaginable abuse while maintaining fragments of his identity. The young man who chose to pass along hope, even when he couldn't feel it himself. The end comes not with violence or drama, but with simple exhaustion. Your damaged lungs finally surrender to the constant assault of stone dust. Your weakened body gives out after one tunnel collapsed too many. You die quietly in the darkness, surrounded by fellow slaves who promise to remember your name and carry your story forward. But this isn't really the end, because stories like yours have no true endings. They echo through generations, whispered in the shadows where power doesn't want to look. They remind us that behind every great civilization's achievements lie countless unnamed victims whose suffering made those achievements possible. The classical world that we admire for its art and philosophy and political innovations was built on a foundation of human misery so vast and systematic that it defies comprehension. The same culture that gave us democracy and theater and rational thought also normalized the complete dehumanization of entire populations. These weren't contradictions. They were complementary aspects of the same system. And if we're honest, we have to acknowledge that similar systems exist today. They're hidden better, sanitized by layers of legal complexity and economic abstraction. But the fundamental dynamic remains unchanged. Powerful people still exploit the powerless. Societies still build their comfort on others' suffering. The vulnerable still disappear into systems designed to consume them, while maintaining plausible deniability for everyone else. We live in a world where children are trafficked for exploitation, while society debates philosophical questions about consent and agency. Where pharmaceutical companies create addiction epidemics while funding research into the nature of mental health. Where technology designed to connect and educate becomes a tool for predation and manipulation of the young and vulnerable. The same moral blindness that allowed Greek intellectuals to torture slaves while writing about virtue allows modern citizens to enjoy products made by child labor while advocating for human rights. The same compartmentalization that let respected philosophers rationalize cruelty lets contemporary leaders ignore systematic abuse while speaking eloquently about justice and progress. We tell ourselves that we've evolved beyond such barbarism, but evolution in human cruelty tends toward refinement rather than elimination. The systems become more complex, the justifications more sophisticated, the victims more distant from those who benefit from their suffering. But the essential transaction remains the same. Some people's pain converted into other people's pleasure or profit. The Greek symposiums where slaves were tortured for entertainment have their modern equivalents in industries that sexualize children, in social media platforms that amplify self-harm among teenagers, in economic systems that treat human beings as disposable resources. The faces change, the technologies evolve, but the willingness to sacrifice the vulnerable for the convenience of the powerful remains constant. Perhaps the most disturbing similarity is how these modern systems hide behind the same kinds of intellectual sophistication that characterized ancient Greece. Complex legal frameworks obscure simple moral questions. Economic theories provide academic cover for exploitation. Technological innovation becomes an excuse for abandoning basic human decency. We create beautiful art while ignoring ugly truths. We write moving poetry while children disappear into systems of abuse. We develop brilliant technologies while algorithms designed to maximize engagement drive vulnerable young people towards self-destruction. We hold sophisticated philosophical discussions about ethics, while the most basic ethical standards are violated daily in our names. The boy whose story we followed through these pages died forgotten in a mountain mine. His name is lost, his suffering unrecorded in official histories, his voice silenced by those who found it inconvenient. But his experience echoes through time in the voices of everyone who has ever been treated as less than human for someone else's benefit. Tonight, somewhere in the world, another child is being sold to pay a family's debts. Another young person is being broken by systems designed to exploit their vulnerability. Another victim is discovering that the civilization they thought was built on noble principles actually rests on foundations of carefully hidden cruelty. Their stories are still being written. Their voices are still crying out for someone to listen, to bear witness, to remember their names and honor their humanity. The question isn't whether such things happen. They do. Constantly. Everywhere. Hidden in plain sight by our collective willingness to look away. The question is whether we'll continue the ancient tradition of moral blindness that allows us to enjoy the benefits of systematic cruelty while maintaining our sense of ethical superiority. Whether we'll keep telling ourselves comfortable lies about human progress, while actual humans suffer in the shadows of our enlightenment. Or whether we'll finally acknowledge that the price of our civilization has always been paid by those who had no choice in the transaction. That the boy in the mountain mine died for the same reason children die today. Because societies have always found ways to rationalize the unthinkable when it serves their interests. The marble halls still echo with his cries. The beautiful mosaics still conceal the stains of innocent blood. And somewhere in our own gleaming cities, in our own sophisticated institutions, the same ancient horrors wear new faces and speak in contemporary languages while the essential evil remains unchanged. We are them. They are us. The only difference is time, and time has never been a barrier to human cruelty, only an excuse for forgetting it.